My last video was on Kundalini rises that are natural and unnaturally provoked within the body. Today I'm going to read to you again about Kundalini, and this is from my article that's found in my book, Splitting the Atma, Revelations on Yoga, available online on Amazon. And this particular one is the 33rd chapter, and it's called Spiritual Liberation Equals Kundalini Annihilation. In yoga, what we ultimately want is to liberate ourselves from the wheel of reincarnation. And so let me pause and just explain reincarnation from my perspective. We are dealing with three bodies. There are three parts to our current reality. The first and most tangible part is our physical body, our physical being, made from the dense elements of this material creation. The second body that we're inside of is the energy body. This is the body that animates and brings to life the physical body. And the physical body only stays alive as long as the subtle body can operate it. Once the subtle body can no longer operate within the physical body will die. It will pass away. But you will still be within a body. That is your energy body or your prana body. It's your psychological house. And this is the body that transmigrates from the astral dimensions, the psychic dimensions of life, to the physical dimensions of life, back and forth, on and on through time in a process that we call reincarnation. Now, the third part of our reality is the most important part. It is the self, and the self resides in the head center of both of these bodies. When the subtle body is infused into a physical body, then that self is within the subtle body and within the physical body. And on the physical level, we find at the seat of that self, the pineal gland. So that's an important gland to study if you haven't already. So in terms of reincarnation, the subtle body, the psychological body, the energy body, there's many names for it, is inhabiting physical bodies and then leaving them and going into the astral dimensions and then re-inhabiting later on through the process of karma and family ties and the ways that we go about gaining a body, obtaining a body. That subtle body is the transmigrating body. But remember, it's not you. It's the ghost, it's the energy body, it's the vehicle that is an interdimensional vehicle, but it isn't you. You are still the passenger in that vehicle because that vehicle belongs to nature, doesn't it? Nature is the one that executes this process of transmigration and of the rollout of time and of reincarnation. And the little self, the little spiritual self who is often asleep, is the passenger and is being tumbled through this, either consciously or unconscious of itself. And so the yoga process is meant to wake up that little spiritual self so that it can have some say-so in where it is going and what it is doing. The wheel of reincarnation is made of a substance. The wheel of reincarnation is made of a substance, a biopsychic material intelligence that, for the purposes of this article, this talk, will be known as the Kundalini life force. Kundalini, what a pretty word. It's a Sanskrit word that literally means coiled she-serpent. It is the designation or name of the ever-changing program we experience and refer to as Mother Nature. She has many names. Some call her Goddess, Madre, the Matrix, the material universe, the Prakriti. Kundalini energy is not spiritual energy, quite the contrary. This image right here in my book, the serpent with its own tail in its mouth. This image represents what this material world is in its simplest principle. a cyclic material force that gives birth to, evolves, and simultaneously destroys itself at once. But it is not you. You are not it. We as spiritual beings live inside this and lose track of our identity. We were put into it, so to speak, long ago, and it is a closed system with few escape possibilities, kind of like a womb. But yoga is an escape possibility. When we practice yoga, we are practicing toward the end of rebirth. That is what our consciousness is focused on. The eventual end of material rebirths. Even if it takes 1,000 lives of practicing yoga, the end of Kundalini. This article explores my answers to these questions. What is Kundalini? How did we get here inside it? Why should I convince my Kundalini to annihilate itself? Who am I without it? So first, what is Kundalini? What is it? People talk about it all the time, but in very vague, sort of esoteric references, very new agey references. Kundalini is the environment in which we live. We call her Mother Nature, and when we examine the situation we are in here, we must come to terms with the reality that we are dependents. We are not in charge. We do not run the functions. She manages everything. The body and mind that you use belong to her. You do not have a personal will of your own, but as you might imagine, while you are living with your mother, it is her will that dominates in your house, right? In her house. In this case, on a universal scale, she is the generator, organizer, and dispenser, the G-O-D, generator, organizer, and dispenser of all reality. But let me ask you this. Do you want to live with your mother forever? Isn't it a natural progression of one's development to eventually move out, move on, and become one's own person, no longer singularly identifying with mother's energy? Through lifetimes of birth and death, we learn to appreciate, admire, and respect our mother. But do we want to live under her authority and sensual requirements eternally? Or do we think more of ourselves and our own personal spiritual identity and ability to mature out from under mom's excessive control? In yoga, we do think more of ourselves and want to know more about ourselves and the other side of existence. Remember, the mystic nature of the serpent has been revered. This is important. The mystic nature of the serpent has been revered, feared, and worshipped throughout all recorded time. Why? My guess is that once human intelligence evolved the intelligence to notice the similarity between the serpent and the human spine chakra system, they put two and two together and discovered a way to symbolize and honor the earth, the elements, and the universe. The human spine, epitome of the evolutionary process, walks around like an upright, confident serpent who has sprouted, evolved a head and arms and legs and an extravagant nervous system. It loves and is programmed to think that it is somebody. It loves to think it's somebody. And it is, for a time, but not eternally. Look at the central serpent that is the spine. Think of your spine, this central serpent figure within you. How did we get in here? So how did we get here, and how did the evolutionary process even begin this? Through meditation, I have come to understand that this natural universe, including all its corresponding astral planes, all of those dream dimensions you go into, is an incubator. It's an incubator kind of structure, and we were put here through the divine yet causeless interaction between spiritual energy and material energy, between mom and dad. Material energy, mom; spiritual energy, dad. The Supreme Mother and Father, attracted to one another, capable of interaction and creation, but independent of each other as well. They came into contact, and he ejaculated us into her. And here we are, spiritual selves inside of a material creation. What science calls the Big Bang, I call the Big Ejaculate. The meeting of the grand masculine and grand feminine produces a strange world and is most accurately symbolized by the Shiva Lingam and Durga Yoni in Hinduism, as shown here in this picture in my book. The Yoni and the serpent around it. The Shiva Lingam and the Durga Yoni. It took me much time in meditation to understand the deep importance of this combination. We spiritually originate in the Father energy because he is stable, unaffected, and all spiritual energy originates in him. Everything that is material is of her, the Mother energy. She is unstable, affected. All particles, subtle and physical, originate in her. It's true that in reality, each of us as real beings is an eternal nano spark of spiritual energy. But we can't deny that we live in a material environment, and that is what we relate to most. It is the sole source of our anxiety and lack of understanding ourselves. In yoga, we aim to conquer that misidentification that causes perpetual anxiety and discipline ourselves out of confusion and misunderstanding. How? If we are into yoga, here's how. First, Patanjali's 8 steps of yoga found in the Yoga Sutras. Here we find that we are expected to clean up the materialistic life through lifestyle regulations, obligations, also through mystic exercises, purification breathing, internalization of attention energies, and the 3-stage meditation process, beginning with effortful connection to a higher concentration source or to a higher entity like a deity. Then the eventual spontaneous, less effortful connection to that higher source. And then ultimately samadhi, the spontaneous, kind of instant connection to that higher concentration source. In yoga, next, so if we're into yoga, this is what we do. First is the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, understanding the Eightfold Path, really understanding it, not just being able to, say what the steps are, but really explaining them and understanding them to yourself, explaining them to yourself. In yoga, next, we believe we have to cultivate a lack of interest in the mundane, physical, psychic world, both, all of it, and focus our efforts off the physical, mental grid and relocate our conscious attention toward association with higher forces and beings of spiritual energy through an advanced type of dissociative meditation called samyam, which is stages 6, 7, and 8 of the Patanjali Yoga process. See chapter 1, verses 12 through 17 of the Yoga Sutras. Especially, I recommend the translation by Michael Beloved. Next, in yoga, how we get out of our confusion and misunderstanding and misidentification of ourselves, is the study and practice of the Bhagavad Gita. Next, the study and practice of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. The next question, why should I convince my Kundalini to annihilate itself? The ultimate answer to that question is because it's worth it. During meditation, I have felt and experienced more than mere glimpses of the spiritual world. The feeling of proper spiritual identification is life-changing. What we want as yogins, spiritual aspirants, is to pull ourselves up, brush off the dust that is the Kundalini sense suit, and start our spiritual lives in earnest, heading toward an environment suitable to the heart of the spiritual being. So once the Kundalini is gone from us, which is a very difficult process, the next question to answer is, who am I without it? Who am I without this, without being this person or another person? Through my practice, supported by the guidance of my teachers, I've proven to myself that I am separate from the Kundalini life force and that I possess a spiritual will. My spirit has a will of its own. This will is the force of who I am as a spiritual person, the Atma in Sanskrit, and it has to work hard day and night to maintain any kind of relationship or awareness with itself while existing in this creation. This universe is a total distraction to spiritual awareness, but is also the only way out. We must harness these material energies and make them work for, serve, and even adore the spiritual self within. It is the greatest hope I have ever felt. The proof to myself that I am me. I am, that I exist, and possess a will that can do things in this world. I can assert myself and act contrary to the sensual desires of the Kundalini life force. I can reform the nature of the body and mind I use. This will, this spiritual will, has the power to reform the body and mind to the point where the body and mind accepts that it is not eternal, accepts that it is but a tiny, deteriorating reflection of what the glorious self really is. It finds this out in meditation. It accepts that it is insufficient as a self and that it cannot be alone, the self. It realizes that it is the spiritual self and it will not be lost if the Kundalini annihilates. Everything that is wondrous about you, everything worth holding on to exists in the middle of your head as the core self. And nothing is lost when all this is gone. So the annihilation process of the Kundalini happens through the execution of a spiritual discipline. What we want to do in yoga is to increase the vibration through the pranayama, the breathing, just getting oxygen into the body, purifying the self, bringing light into the body, bringing light into our everyday lifestyle, into our food, into our interactions, into our entertainment. And doing all of these things increases the vibration of the subtle body. And upon the death of the physical body, what we hope is that that vibration will be compatible with a higher dimension and that we won't reincarnate here onto this level of traumatic living. As Buddha pointed out in the first of the noble truths of Buddhism, life is trauma. So many great spiritual masters have recognized that This world is not their ultimate destination. This world is not their home. So as we increase the vibrancy of the subtle body, eventually the self can emerge from it into a heavenly realm. That's the hope. That's the mission. And that's what yoga is meant for. Liberation of the soul, purification of the vehicles that it is dependent on and utilizing and stuck in, and eventually getting out of that vehicle and being in a world that is suited just for a spiritual self, a naked spiritual self, in its own body, only under the influence of its own will and the will of the God in that heavenly creation. So again, that article is found in my book, Splitting the Atma, Revelations on Yoga. Thanks for listening.